Just after 3:30 on the morning of 12th May 2025, the forecourt of Hedgley service station in Palburn, Northumberland was empty. That particular stretch of the A697 doesn't attract much in the way of passing trade at that hour. Nothing moving, no headlights coming either way, just the hum of the ATM housing unit and the overhead lights washing the tarmac white. Then a man stepped up to the cash machine. He wasn't there to withdraw money. He reached forward, pressed a rectangular package into the dispenser tray and pulled out a cigarette lighter. He lit the cord that was sticking out of the package. Then he walked quickly back to the car parked behind him. A stolen Audi fitted with false registration plates, and he and his companion crouched behind it and waited. About a minute passed. The device exploded. The machine caught fire. The outer casing was destroyed. Somewhere in the region of £4,815 worth of damage was done to the structure and the surrounding area. The cash box inside, the armored vault that actually held the money, did not open. The two men got back in the car and drove away with nothing. This was not the beginning of the story, and it was not the end of it either. Welcome to Crime Pulse. If you're new here, we cover UK criminal cases, the investigations, the courtrooms, and the rulings that shaped them. Subscribe if you want to follow along, and stay with us, because this one develops in ways you wouldn't predict. To understand what happened on that Northumberland forecourt, you need to understand the work that went into it beforehand, because this was not a spontaneous act. After the arrest of Kristopher Follos in September 2025, investigators applied for and executed a forensic examination of his mobile phone. What they found on that device was, in the words of the case at Newcastle Crown Court, something of a documented record of how this operation had been constructed. Follos had searched online for videos explaining how to blow up ATMs. He had read multiple news reports about cash-in-transit van robberies. He had studied maps specifically showing the locations of rural cash machines across the country. The sites he targeted were not chosen at random. They were isolated, low-footfall locations where CCTV coverage was limited and police response times at that hour would be measured in minutes rather than seconds. Each attack took place in the very early hours of the morning. Each one targeted a machine that sat in an open, publicly accessible area. The forecourt of a petrol station, a supermarket car park, but at a time when the reasonable expectation was that no one would be around. He had also assembled equipment. When police later searched his BMW, they found gloves, crowbars, a face covering, and safety glasses. These are not items you accumulate by accident. They are the components of a kit, assembled with a purpose. By the time Follos lit that fuse in Palburn, months of preparation had already gone into the attempt. What 45 years of living and the better part of a year's research had not told him was something fundamental about the engineering of the machines he was targeting. But we'll come to that. Kristopher Follos was 45 years old at the time of his arrest. He lived in a block of flats on Oliver's Mill in Morpeth, Northumberland, in accommodation registered to his mother. On paper, a middle-aged man in a quiet market town in the northeast. In practice, he carried a criminal record that stretched back to when he was 17 years old. A list of 28 offences accumulated over nearly 3 decades. Burglaries, robberies, offences against property. The kind of record that doesn't speak to someone who drifted into crime once and paid the price. It speaks to someone who kept coming back to it. The entry that matters most for understanding where Follos ended up is from 2001. That year, he walked into a bank and threatened staff with an imitation firearm. He was convicted of robbery and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He served that sentence and came out. What apparently stayed with him, what seems to have calcified somewhere in his thinking over the years that followed, was the underlying logic of what he'd attempted. Take the bank, take the money. What changed was the method. If the problem with the 2001 bank robbery was the human element, the staff who could identify him, the witnesses who could testify, the threat of violence that turned a theft into something more serious, then perhaps the answer was to take people out of the equation entirely. Go in the early hours. Go when there's nobody there. Don't threaten anyone. Just bring something that opens the machine for you. The flaw in this reasoning, which would become apparent only after 3 separate attempts across 3 different English counties, is that the machines are designed not to be opened, not by anyone who isn't authorized to open them. The outer casing of an ATM can be damaged, even destroyed. The inner vault, the armored cassette housing that actually holds the cash, is engineered to withstand precisely this kind of assault. That is the primary function of its design, and no amount of tutorial videos watched at odd hours on a mobile phone was going to change that engineering. Follos appears to have understood this in the abstract. He searched for methods, he watched footage, he studied how other people had approached the problem. What the research couldn't give him was the one thing that would have made the plan work: a device powerful enough to defeat a vault, built by people who anticipated exactly what he was building. The attack at Hedgeley unfolded in 2 phases, and that detail matters, because a single failed attempt you could put down to poor timing or nerves. 2 attempts at the same machine in the same night, separated by an hour and a half, suggests something more deliberate. Follos and his companion arrived at Hedgeley service station in the early hours of 12th May 2025 in the stolen Audi with false plates. Their first approach came at around 2 a.m. Prosecutor Jolyon Perks, presenting the case at Newcastle Crown Court, told the court that one of the men tried to push something into the machine manually. It didn't take. They didn't leave. They drove off, waited, and came back. At around 3:30 a.m., Follos approached the ATM a second time. The CCTV footage captured it in detail. The walk to the machine, the rectangular package being pushed into the cash dispenser tray, the cigarette lighter being produced, the cord being lit, the retreat to the car. He and his companion took cover behind the Audi. They waited approximately a minute. The machine exploded and caught fire. Perks told the court that the machine had held a large amount of cash at the time of the attack. The explosion caused £4,815 worth of damage. It did not breach the inner cash box. Nothing was taken. The 2 men drove away. What they left behind was more than they intended. The CCTV footage was clear. The attack was distinctive, and the pattern of it, the specific method, the timing, the type of location, was unusual enough that it would register when the same approach was used again. 8 weeks passed between the attack in Northumberland and the next one. Whether Follos spent that time refining his devices, scouting new locations, or simply waiting out the initial heat from the first incident is not something the court record makes clear. What is clear is that on July 8, 2025, he struck again. The target this time was a cash machine at an Asda superstore on Michael Way at Wharf Park Rons in Northamptonshire, some 200 miles south of Palburn. The distance was presumably part of the logic. Spread the attacks across different force areas, different geography, different sets of investigators who would need to connect the incidents before they could see a pattern. The device Follos used at the Rons Asda was destructive enough to write off the machine entirely. It caused £3,500 worth of damage. It did not open the cash safe. He took nothing. Just over a month after that, on the 11th of August 2025, came the third attack. A Morrison's in St Ives, Cambridgeshire, at around 2 a.m. Again, the device detonated. Again, the exterior of the machine was wrecked. Approximately £4,900 worth of damage. Again, the cash inside remained locked and inaccessible. Again, Follos left empty-handed. 3 attacks, 3 counties, roughly £13,000 in damage to property. 0 cash recovered. What this sequence shows is not just the persistence of someone committed to a method. It's the persistence of someone committed to a method that demonstrably wasn't working. After Palburn failed, he didn't reassess the fundamental approach. He changed the location. After Rons failed, he changed the location again. The core assumption that a more powerful or better placed device would eventually breach the vault was never abandoned, even as the evidence of 3 separate failures accumulated. Judge Robert Adams, sentencing Follos at Newcastle Crown Court, made an observation about the moment of detonation that cuts to what made all of this dangerous regardless of outcome. Once those fuses were lit, the judge said, Follos was no longer in control of what happened next. Anyone who pulled onto a forecourt at the wrong moment, anyone who happened to be in the vicinity of a supermarket car park at 2 a.m. and heard something worth investigating, could have walked into the radius of one of those explosions. The fact that no one did is, by any reasonable measure, good fortune rather than careful planning. The Northeast Regional Organised Crime Unit took the lead. working alongside Northumbria police from the outset and drawing on Bedfordshire police as the investigation expanded geographically. The Hedgley CCTV footage was an early priority. It showed both men at the machine in enough detail to work with. The stolen Audi had false plates, but vehicles leave traces beyond their registration, and the method used in the attack was specific enough that it could be linked to the later incidents in Northamptonshire and Cambridgeshire once investigators identified the pattern. Follos's mobile phone, when retrieved and examined, turned out to be one of the more comprehensive pieces of evidence in the case. The search histories, the tutorial videos, the news reports about cash-in-transit robberies, the maps of rural ATMs, all of it recoverable by digital forensics regardless of whether he had deleted it. The phone documented, in effect, the research phase of what he'd planned and executed. The BMW he drove yielded the physical evidence: gloves, crowbars, face covering, safety glasses, a kit that made its own argument about intent. By September 2025, investigators had identified Follos as their primary suspect. They knew where he was. The question of what they would find when they got there was about to become considerably more complicated than anyone anticipated. On September 24, 2025, officers attended the flat at Oliver's Mill, Morpeth. The residential block had 16 flats, the majority of them occupied by elderly residents. Follos was there. He was arrested without incident. Then officers searched the bedroom. In a box, inside a sideboard, they found 3 improvised explosive devices, live devices, viable, in the language used by Julian Perks at court. The building was evacuated, all 16 flats. The explosive ordnance disposal team was called. They attended and removed the devices safely. The elderly residents who had been moved out of their homes that afternoon had no connection to Kristopher Follos' criminal activities beyond the fact that they happened to share a building with him. The significance of those 3 devices is worth sitting with for a moment. Follos had already used 3 IEDs across his campaign of attacks. He had 3 more at home, in a box, ready. The campaign was not, by any interpretation, finished. In his police interview, Follos made full admissions. He confirmed his involvement in all 3 ATM attacks and confirmed the details as investigators had recorded them. He did not dispute the evidence. A second man, 56 years old, was arrested on the same day with support from Bedfordshire police and released on police bail. He was not publicly named, and within the scope of these proceedings, he was not charged. Exactly what role, if any, he played in the broader operation was not aired in the sentencing of Follos. Kristopher Follos appeared before North Tyneside Magistrates Court in September 2025, charged with conspiracy to steal, conspiracy to cause explosions, and making an explosive substance. He was remanded in custody, the 3 viable devices found in his bedroom having made any bail argument essentially untenable before it started. The case was committed to Newcastle Crown Court. Prosecutor Julian Perks laid out the evidence in full. The 3 attacks, the CCTV footage, the phone records, the digital forensics, the items in the BMW, the devices in the sideboard, the 28 previous convictions, the 2001 bank robbery sentence. Follos pleaded guilty to all charges, expanded for the purposes of the Crown Court proceedings to include conspiracy to cause explosions endangering life, making an explosive device, and conspiring to steal. Judge Robert Adams addressed the nature of the offending at sentencing with some directness. The fact that Follos and his companion had run behind the car at Hedgley service station before the device detonated, the judge said, demonstrated that they must have anticipated a fairly extensive explosion. This was not a miscalculation about the scale of the blast. It was acknowledgement of it. They knew what they had built and what it was capable of. The decision to detonate it in a location where members of the public could reasonably have been present was made anyway. The judge described Follos as a dangerous offender posing a high risk of serious harm to the public. He was sentenced to 8 years in custody. Upon his release, he would serve a further 3 years on extended license. After sentencing, Detective Sergeant Patrick Norton of Northeast Regional Organised Crime Unit spoke publicly about the case. Follos has proven he is an extreme danger to the public, he said, and this sentence reflects the hard work officers and partners have put in to secure this result. He acknowledged the collaborative work of the specialist teams across NERO-Q, Northumberland Police, and Bedfordshire Police that had tracked Follos across 3 counties and brought the investigation to its conclusion. David Lee, senior Crown Prosecutor at CPS Northeast, addressed the central fact of the case plainly. Follos had used improvised explosive devices that posed an obvious danger to the public, and he had given that danger, as Lee put it, little thought in pursuit of his own financial gain. Both statements point at the same thing. The danger here was not theoretical. 3 devices detonated in publicly accessible locations: a petrol station, a supermarket car park, a supermarket, during hours when the probability of someone being nearby was reduced but by no means eliminated. 3 more devices were found at a residential address in the building housing 16 households of predominantly elderly residents ready to be used. That no one was seriously hurt across the entire episode is difficult to attribute to anything other than circumstance. What Follos's criminal record tells you, in its length and its consistency, is that this is someone who has spent the better part of his adult life attempting variations on the same basic project, taking money that belongs to other people through force or threat or latterly explosive, and cycling through the consequences. The 2001 bank robbery didn't end the logic. It redirected it. The 7 years served didn't dissolve the ambition. It just meant that the next iteration needed to be constructed differently. 3 cash machines, £13,000 in damage, no cash recovered, 8 years in prison with 3 more years on license to follow. The arithmetic of the plan never came close to working. By the time that was fully apparent, the investigation had already assembled the CCTV footage, the phone records, the forensic kit from the BMW, and the 3 devices in the sideboard into a case that left very little room for anything except what eventually happened at Newcastle Crown Court. Kristopher Follos walked away from Hedgeley with nothing the night of 12th May. He was always going to. If you want more cases like this one, stories that don't flinch, investigations that follow the evidence all the way to the end, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every case we cover is one more story that deserves to be told properly. And if this video reached you through someone sharing it, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. We will see you in the next one.